We're going to start with, we like to start our sessions with a grounding and an opening quote. And today's quote is, "Belonging is much more profound than access. It's about co-creating the thing you belong to, the thing you're joining, rather than having to conform to the rules already set." And as we're thinking through today's session and working through it, we ask that you carry this quote with you and think about the systems that are there and how many spaces you have to go into with rules already set and how that has made you feel. We also want you to think about, as we think about our land and the lands that we're on. And if we can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. Just an understanding for us in the work that we do that these lands, the indigenous peoples to this land and their connection to this land has been fraught by violence, disease, treaties, invading settlers, relocations, forcible removals, reservations, and other colonial actions and practices. And although it's been a violent history, we also want to remind you that this land has continued to hold a great historical, spiritual, and personal significance for the original land stewards of this region. We also acknowledge those of us who came here involuntarily, particularly forcibly displanted Africans brought here as a result of the transatlantic slave trade and slavery. As we engage in this work around access and our relationship and understanding our relationship to land and colonial systems and practices, we believe that advancing Indigenous sovereignty is deeply connected to Black liberation, and we remain committed to advancing these efforts. With our next slide, we're just going to walk you through what our plans are for the day and for this session. We have, hopefully will be a super engaging session. There'll be some very interactive moments. We're going to ask for you, if possible, to use the chat if you can. If not, that's fine. We'll have some other ways for you to be able to engage. We've went through our welcome and introduction. I will say formally, I am Kimberly Tull. I am the Director of Community and Learning Partnerships and Access Pathways at the University of Toronto Scarborough. And my pronouns are she and her, and I'll ask my colleagues quickly to introduce themselves.
I'm Jessica Rain. I'm the Coordinator of Community Partnerships and Engagement at the University of Toronto Scarborough.
And I'm Kathy Little. I'm Special Advisor to the Dean on Access, Director of the Transitional Year Program, and I'm also a sociology professor and have the joy of teaching about 500 first-year students every year.
Wonderful, thank you both. So we both, all three of us, work within the Access portfolios at the University of Toronto Scarborough, and we'll share a little bit more about that in a bit. We'll ground us also in some conversational norms, a grounding just question. Kathy will usher us into a conversation around access at U of T Scarborough. What does that look like? A larger thinking together kind of question, and around belonging. And Jessica will take you through examples of what we do within U of T Scarborough and some collective reflections. So as we're thinking about grounding our practices, or before we even get to that, when we look at our conversational norms, just as a reminder, as we engage in this work, that this is a gracious space. We focus on our own experiences. We're going to balance the I with active listening, always assessing intent and impact, knowing that words do carry weight and they matter. And that we're going to hopefully deepen our awareness in ourselves, in the systems that we exist in, and then what our roles and responsibilities are there. Strive for affirming experiences and building of community, respect each other's confidentiality as much as possible in this kind of space, and then sit in our discomfort and practice silence and know that that's okay to be in that kind of mentality and mental state. With respect to grounding our work and just this conversation, you've heard me mentioned earlier when speaking about the land, but just so we're all clear about, as we engage in access work, it's about values-based and asset-based work. That means that we don't look at people as a deficit. We don't look at people's backgrounds as a deficit. Instead, we center humans, we center people and their experiences, and we root the work within values and principles and practices that will then hold us to account. It's anti-oppressive practices as well. So as I was saying earlier, and then it's centered in hope and care. You can't do this work unless you actually bring your heart to it, and that you have aspirations for a better way of being, and a better system, better structures for all of us to thrive in. And it's important for us that community governance and leadership is critical to this. So we talked about co-creating with the opening quote from Dr. John Powell. And so that's the community governance and leadership perspective that's being in space with all of you all today, having your voices as the circle of care, as parents, caregivers, teachers, whomever else, mentors who are supporting the students, that you're part of this process with us and that we're here to listen and to be able to work together to improve it. So the question then that we're asking you, and this is for you to think about, if there's an opportunity for you to put it in the chat, go ahead, but do you feel your child or children or the children or the child in your life bring their authentic selves to their learning spaces? So take a moment to think about that. Take a moment to think about that in context to the land acknowledgement that was said earlier, and then the quote around belonging. And you can continue to think about that. Think about what it would require. If you said yes, why? Why do your children feel that way? What kind of circumstances and environment has been created for them? And if it's no, then what would you like to see different in those kinds of spaces for your student, for your young person to feel like they can actually see themselves and feel like they can bring themselves into those spaces? And then the other question we would have is, should they ought to bring their authentic selves fully into those spaces? I'm going to wrap up with this next slide and then turn it over to my colleague, Kathy, to take us into what it means for us at U of T Scarborough. But it's important for you to understand and know that for us at the University of Toronto Scarborough, that we are committed to this. We've been committed to this for a long time. But most recently, we've had a strategic plan that's come into play that actually names and speaks to this. And that's an important part of the work, is that we have a document that's called Inspiring Inclusive Excellence Strategic Plan that demonstrates our commitment, and it's in writing, and it's explicit, and it's intentional. With it also, you'll see the other documents beside it, the Scarborough Charter, which addresses anti-Black racism, our curriculum review, the Anti-Black Racism Task Force report, and the GRC, Truth and Reconciliation recommendations from the University of Toronto. All of these documents and all these papers explicitly state our values, our intentions, and the actions. And then it also is public information, which allows then for everyone to be able to hold the institution to account. And that piece around accountability is so critically important to doing the work around access. Over to you, Kathy.
Thank you. So I want us to take a step back and think about what we actually mean when we're talking about access. And when we think about post-secondary access, we tend to think about it in two ways. The first is the number of people that actually attend post-secondary education. So who is there, and more importantly, who isn't there, and why, and how can we help remove the barriers so that we see that influx? And secondly, whether or not all people have equitable opportunity to access post-secondary education and succeed, whatever succeed means to them. We are very clear that success means different things to different people, and we want to support in whatever way is necessary. Now, this isn't to say that all people should necessarily attend post-secondary education. Not everybody's interested in it. Not everybody needs it. But for those who do, it's vital that everyone has an equitable chance of accessing it. So these are exactly the kinds of questions that we ask at UTSC. How do we create equitable opportunities, which will then help us increase the number of students from different equity-seeking groups? And this is not an exhaustive list, but we are looking in particular to create opportunities for Indigenous and Black students, students with disabilities, rural students who have geographic challenges in accessing post-secondary, students who are juggling families along with their education, or students who are in care, and students from low socioeconomic locations. And again, this is not an exhaustive list, but an example of the many equity-seeking groups that we are attempting to support. So when we think about access in general, we can think about dividing into three different categories of barriers that come up. The first is more on a personal or individual level: knowledge, skills, motivations, attitude. So do people even know about the opportunities available in post-secondary? Do they have the kinds of skills and preparation that universities are looking for? Do they have the motivations? And can they even see themselves there? Is it even being seen as an opportunity that they could consider? The second are the systemic institutional barriers and culture. And these are the things that are on us to change, to remove as many barriers as we can possibly remove, whether they are barriers that are set up by the institution or by various levels of government or by our culture. And finally is the sense of community and sense of belonging. And we know as educators that if students have a sense of belonging and feel a sense of community, they do better. And we want them to do better, and we want them to be there and seeing themselves. So we need them to be able to see themselves as part of the community, both before they arrive so that they can imagine themselves here, as well as once they are here on our campus for whatever kind of program they're participating in. So when we think about these barriers throughout post-secondary education, there are a lot of prevalent ones that will be familiar to many of you. The first is lack of resources, social capital, generational knowledge. So this, if you think about it, those of us who were the first in our families to go to higher education don't have that centering within family of what does it take to get in? How do you navigate the system once you arrive in there? And so building up that knowledge and that social capital so students can find their way in and then thrive once they're there. We face lack of knowledge sometimes in the community about the programs and pathways and supports that we have. So we're always trying to make sure that we get the word out. And that again is on us to make that communication happen. We face lack of representation sometimes in terms of staff, faculty, and students that reflect the diverse communities that our equity-seeking populations are coming from. And sometimes we face challenges with creating a curriculum that connects to students' lived experiences. And again, as educators, we know that if students are able to connect their academic learning to personal experiences, it becomes far more powerful for them. And they retain it more and are able to embody it in a greater sense. Financial obstacles and support goes without saying. The fact that we have students who are streamed at various points in K through 12. And so we have students who would thrive and would enjoy and would do well in post-secondary, but who have somehow been streamed into a different route. And we need to figure out how to help them get back on the route they want to. Lack of trust in institutions and the education system. And we are deeply, deeply aware of the ways in which institutions and educators have created traumatic experiences for many of our students, and we're committed to trying to repair that trust that has been broken. And finally, the barrier of lack of sense of belonging. And belonging is a theme that you've picked up. We are going to talk about over and over again, because that is key to our approach here at UTSC. So when we look at our own vision of access here, we say that we want learners from traditionally underrepresented groups to be valued, supported, represented, and feel a sense of belonging as they connect to U of T Scarborough continuum of access opportunities. I want to pull out a couple of key words from this. Valued, supported, represented, and feel a sense of belonging. So we are not in this just to increase our numbers. We are not in this because we want to look at our admissions records every year and check off which communities are represented and be happy if there are greater numbers than there were before. We're in this for the whole spectrum, the whole continuum of experiences, and in ensuring that our campus is the kind of environment where people can thrive and belong. And you'll also notice the word continuum. Sometimes when people talk about access, they are really restricted to talking about access in the sense of recruitment and admission. So how do we get students into school? But we can't forget that the recruitment and the community building has to start way back. And we're committed to that at UTSC as well, that we see our work in access as starting K through 12 kinds of connections, moving all the way through. And you can see in this chart, belonging again at the center of everything. We have our access reaching backwards, outreach, reaching out to the communities, reaching out to kids K through 12, whether it's us going in to give guest lectures with faculty, whether it's us bringing students to campus at whatever age to have the experience of being on a university campus and start feeling that sense that I can see myself here, I can belong here. We have the recruitment and making sure we've removed barriers so that the admissions process is as transparent and as easy to navigate as possible. Once students are here, we focus on retention and persistence. So surrounding them with the supports that they need and the sense of belonging that they need to make sure that they succeed, again, in whatever way they perceive or define success. We have graduation, getting students through the graduation process and then helping see them through to the next step, whatever the next step is in the next stage of life, however they define that, we want to be there to help hold them up. So our particular objectives at UTSC are objectives that we work on both internally and externally. So making visible the work that we do. That is one of the reasons we're here today, making sure that the community, members of the community know about the programs we have and the commitment that we have at our core. We also work on that within our institution, making sure our colleagues are aware of all the different efforts that are going on and creating opportunities for colleagues to be involved. We work hard on making sure we are structured in a way that supports our longevity and sustained success in offering the programs. We work on widening our community, both inwards and outwards. So inwards, again, making sure that those who are interested in access work have those opportunities, either to build on what we already do or to create new ones, and widening our community outwards to the community in general, but also to community partners. We already have many community partners that we work with, and we have been doing access work on our campus for a very, very long time. So none of this is new, but we have this renewed commitment to making sure that the community knows we are here and that we want to be there, we want to be in partnership. We work on creating academic networks so that we can figure out pathways for students, even in pathways that are not necessarily traditional for U of T Scarborough students. And then critical to us is this emphasis on self-reflection and ensuring excellence. We know that we need to be existing in a continual process of self-reflection so that we make sure that we are staying true to our values, that we are engaging with our community with the respect and the honor that they deserve. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Jessica.
All right, thank you, Kathy. So now I want us to kind of just have a quick kind of discussion and see what you think about what belonging means to you and what does that mean for your child to belong, for you to belong in the education system at schools. So I'm going to invite you all to use Mentimeter, where you'll go to the website that is on the screen, and I'll put it in the chat as well. And you'll type in the code below, and we'll kind of get an idea of some phrases and words that come to mind for all of you when it comes to belonging. So we'll take a few moments now. Should be able to see results soon if everyone has shared. I think you might have to refresh your page. Anyone else? Okay, well, we can go back to that if anything. But But it's important we think about belonging and what it means to us individually. So we have community, we have care, we have respect, we have trust, being seen. These are all the recipes for belonging. So we want to talk a little bit about what belonging looks like at UTSC and how we're creating spaces and a sense of belonging on campus. So thank you for participating. So how we see belonging. So really, how we would break it down in a recipe is feeling authentically seen, valued, represented. So someone seeing your identity, your gifts, your contributions, there's an understanding of somebody's identity in the space and what they're carrying with them, and can not only considering it, but embracing it. It's about feeling connected to a collective or a greater purpose. So knowing that, you know, if you were missing from the community, that you would be missed. There are people there that value you. And same for yourself, that if you were there, that you would be missed and you would miss folks that were there because you're part of a place that is encouraging you and uplifting you, and you see your best self in those places. Feeling supported. So supportive relationships are very important to creating this sense of belonging on campus and in the community. So characterized by relationships. So again, trust and respect. It's the only way one can feel confident and comfortable to express themselves in the fullest. Supportive learning environments are important as well. Again, having that community of care where there is a sense of security. So if you fall, if you stumble, if you fail, there's a safety net there within that community. So we are striving to establish that and accomplish that at UTSC, and by no means are we perfect, but there are some ways that we can show that we've done that in our programs. But before I get to the programs, I did want to also share a quote again from John Powell, who mentions inclusion is you being invited into someone's space, while belonging is when you get to create the space. So diversity and inclusion may capture your head, but belonging captures your heart. And that's the work that we want to do and center. So next slide, please. So now I'm going to just share some of the programs where we can really detail how we're, affirming folks' identity and creating a sense of belonging through these programs. And the first program that I want to share is the Transitional Year Program, the TYP program at UTSC. So the TYP program has been around for over 50 years, around 50 years. And is rooted in the Black community. So this has been going on downtown campus, and really was committed and is committed to creating a pathway for folks who have faced barriers, specifically looking at Black and Indigenous, but other racialized folks and folks who face barriers like students with disabilities, LGBTQ+ communities, and low-income families. So we have started this at UTSC, and it has definitely been a community kind of practice and a community commitment to have this running and created. So it took a lot of conversations across campus. It took conversations with community, and it took conversations with the folks at the downtown campus to actually create these supportive spaces. So how do we affirm and create belonging through this program? Well, intentionally curating staff across all departments dedicated to wraparound services for students. So supporting them in application process, financial services, learning strategies for those struggling with learning disabilities, health and wellness, emotional supports, academic advisors. So really understanding the students. These are mature students, so understanding where they're coming from and their history. It's also seen in the curriculum as well. So being very intentional in hiring staff that understands the lived experiences and approaches learning, not from a deficit lens, but positive and empowering. So one of the example that I can give around that is around the teaching of English, and validating folks' history and experiences with their mother tongue. So inviting folks to actually bring their different languages into the space, included in the writings and their stories. So those types of affirming of identity and supports and celebrating someone's history and identity. Also curating curriculum that is important to the population. So knowing the population, understanding, okay, this is a program that is focused on Black and Indigenous folks. So incorporating African perspectives and Indigenous knowledges into the curriculum. So courses like writing for advocacy, or even thinking about, math and having a spin on personal finance, because this is a mature group, and understanding what is relevant in their lives. So it really is centering community, creating a space where students get to see staff, faculty that look like them, that understand their experiences. So that's one of the examples we're doing at UTSC. Next slide. So CU of T Scarborough is another transitional program or access program. So this program specifically is looking at supporting high school students. So this is a partnership with TDSB, where we are actually creating programs and pathways for high school students to get experience on campus, to actually see themselves on campus, get high school credits, get co-op credits, get experiential learning, and actually form a community on campus with students and staff that look like them and understand their experiences. Next. The Amani Mentorship Program, the Amani Black Academic Mentorship Program. So this is a Scarborough-bred program that began when a Black administrator on campus saw the need for Black students and community to connect, to support with each other and celebrate their identity. So it really uses an Afrocentric values and principles. So Amani meaning faith or spirituality in Swahili, really allowing Black students on campus to collaborate with each other, build relationships with each other, design and lead programming with each other, but also connect into the community. So over 14 years, they've been establishing great relationships with several Scarborough schools in the local community, and doing a lot of mentorship programming, social programming, but also academic. There's a big academic lens to this. So how does this affirm identity and create a sense of belonging? Well, it's twofold. So Black UTS students become the mentors and become the leaders. They do training together. They actually spend time learning about each other, create a healing space for each other, but also then go into the community and support community and younger students with their academics and personal lives. So there's a lot of amazing things that happen, but at the crux of it, it's that they're celebrating their identity, and now younger students can see themselves on campus through this. Next slide. So we also have the Modern Day Griot Project. So this is Black community-led collaboration that really gives University of Toronto students, Black students, the skills and ability to showcase their strength and beauty in the Black community. So it's really looking at Afrocentric principles and philosophies and how you can incorporate it into your life and your stories. So students create a healing space, share their experience. They get to connect with each other. They get to really think about different questions around their lived experiences and what Black excellence looks like for them. So there's a lot of learning, a lot of crafting their stories, learning about techniques around communications and how to tell a story, and they get to share this. But the other part of that is that they get to also mentor TDSB students, so Durham District School Board, students who are in grade 10 and 11, they get to support them in crafting their stories. There's several engagements where they get to come on campus and actually connect with these students and build strong relationships. So that is next one. And so we have the 100 Strong Academy. So the 100 Strong Academy is a partnership with 100 Strong Foundation, and also a connection with TDSB, so the Durham District School Board. And this really focuses on seeing that there was a need to support Black boys and Black students in graduation and retention at university, but in schools, in high schools as well. So how do we, from very young, support them in building a sense of belonging when it comes to the education system and validating their experiences? So we were honored to have 3 weeks over the summer to get together with Black staff, faculty, students, and community to come together and curate a curriculum that centered these boys, centered them, and learning about academic theory, learning about, participating experiential learning. So we were able to do that with community educators and folks across campus. So they were able to learn about financial literacy and history of wealth in Africa and among African communities. They learned to write themselves love letters with poet Dwayne Morgan. They engage in African and Caribbean drumming through healing circles, as well as learning the steel pan instruments that have cultural relevance for many, and which you probably have little exposure in schools and curriculums. So also explored science in the lab, led by Black scientist, Professor Madiane Andrade, who is the president of the Canadian Black Science Network. So there was a lot of amazing opportunities for these boys to engage, but also to see Black men as their mentors and facilitators in that space, which was very important. Next slide. Okay, so the village is Indigenous focused programming and a creation of pathways that are unique to Indigenous communities. So the village seeks to create a direct supportive pathway for Indigenous folks who are currently in the college stream but are considering a university degree. Students get to spend a week on campus, engaged in campus life with a supportive community that centers their identity. And they get to learn and build relationships with Indigenous students, staff, faculty, and understand the supports that are on campus for them. So it is really about that relationship piece and affirming their identity and making it a place where they feel like they can come and reach out and actually pursue further education at the university. So next, I will say, so overall, this is just a snapshot of how we create a sense of belonging for learners at UTSC. And there's a lot of work to be done. We want to find more ways to create pathways for everyone who wants to explore education and lifelong learning. And we want to make that possible at UTSC. And we understand that a lot of these pathways, some of these pathways may not be pathways that you could relate to. But currently we are having discussions around various access pathways and initiatives to support learners living with specific disabilities, learners looking to engage in pathways in music and music making, pathways for artists and designers, and pathways into medicine and healthcare professions. So I think the biggest thing is that we continue to have these conversations with community so we can support in the collaboration and creation of the pathways that's most important for you. And lastly, I am going to get to the reflection question. So that's pretty much what we wanted to share, but we did want to leave some time for questions and a reflection. So here are some questions to kind of bring us into some conversation. The first one, what are some of the challenges that parents and caregivers have experienced in their relationships with schooling and schools? And second, how can post-secondary institutions become more accessible to parents, caregivers, K-12 students, and educators? How would you like us to engage with you? So that's very important. What would you like to see? How can we continue this conversation outside of this space? And lastly, what barriers currently exist and how might we move past them? So I'll open the floor for that conversation now. If anybody, and you can also use the chat if that works for you.
I'll also share, Jessica, the Mentimeter, if that's fine. It's been updated.
Awesome. Okay.
Yeah, you'll see we have things such as feeling free, being respected and protected, strength of mind, feeling secure.
Feeling secured, yes, environment works.
Being
Yeah.
heard, understood, supported, not feeling alone. So I think it's in line with the pieces that both you and Kathy were speaking about earlier and where we started in terms of our grounding. And hopefully as we're thinking about these reflection questions, we can think about what belonging means to us and what that can look like for young people as they're coming into post-secondary.
Absolutely. I was just gonna share the questions also in the chat for folks to So is there any thoughts on how you would want to engage with us post-secondary education institutions? Do you have any experience building relationships with institutions like ours? Anything you would like to see?
And perhaps I'll add here, Jessica, that I know that it seems like university or post-secondary is far away. But as Kathy was mentioning in some of the examples from Jessica, we're looking as far back as elementary school, that K-8. That's when decisions get made, when children start to fall in love or start to see themselves not belonging into spaces. And so if you have younger children in your life, to think about what that would look like for them as well. There's a remark from a bear in the chat that says the challenges are there in no future. Is there no future plan for our kids with learning disabilities? I'm assuming that's what LD means, to bear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So those are some of the conversations that we're having, that this is our decision as parents and we don't belong to them. I hear you, Abir. These are some of the conversations that we are having. So we have a department on campus called Accessibility that really supports folks with learning disabilities. And one of the directors there, we have constant conversations about what can we do prior to post-secondary education to support students before they actually get to post-secondary education. So those pathways are something that we're really thinking about deeply, and trying to, get all those resources together to make it happen. But it definitely requires more conversations with parents like yourself, and schools. So that connection has to continue to happen, and that communication. So I thank you for bringing that up, because it's definitely something on our radar, and maybe we can continue this conversation. So we are going to share our contact. So would definitely like to hear more from you.
I'll also add, we've also heard more about how we want to make sure the lens of intersectionality is something that we approach the work with. And so we see in a lot of our other access programs that although they may not center students experiencing learning disabilities as the primary cohort, there are people who are experiencing and living with learning disabilities. And so how do we create space and that center, that space of and understanding of belongingness, and being just very transparent about the supports that are in place for them, and for them to be able to see mentorship and other individuals who might be going through similar life experiences as they have been. So trying to make sure that it's embedded in a really good and intentional way within existing programs, but then also thinking about ways of reaching back and how do we create those direct pathways also for students who have learning disabilities. There's a part two, there's a second question. Go ahead, Kathy.
Abir, I also wanted to just give you some specific examples of the kinds of supports that we have. Again, I'm a professor, and so I see this with many of my students who are registered with accessibility services because they have learning disabilities. And they're given all kinds of supports ranging from extra time on tests to note takers in class, to being able to have one-on-one sessions with accessibility coaches, to being able to have formats of books provided in different formats depending on what they need to best support their learning. So there is a tremendous amount of support built into the institution once the students arrive here.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jessica.
No, I was going to say definitely. And I hear you on that third point, Abir, the barriers and just connecting with schools, with parents and mapping, having a kind of map, a roadmap for the kids. Absolutely. So I have shared directly with you my contact, and we are also going to share everyone's contact as well.
Maybe it's a good segue because I believe our session's over in 1 minute. So maybe we'll go to the next slide if there's no other questions or comments or feedback. That's our reference slide, and we can always send this out. And then the final slide here about keeping in touch, and we actually mean that. So please take our information, connect with any one of us to have a deeper conversation about how we can keep in touch with you, how we can work with you on that mapping, mapping that roadmap for your children and for the kids in your lives. And even just what those frequent meetings and seminars and how best to communicate with you, because that's something we're always trying to think through about it. We hope that today that you were able to find the session informative, one, but beneficial and an opportunity for you at least to start the relationship with us and the conversation with us so that we can continue to build and dismantle a lot of these systems that aren't really beneficial to many of the young people in their lives, so that they can see themselves in post-secondary, and that once they're there, they actually feel like they belong, can thrive, and excel in whatever way they define that for themselves and with their family. We appreciate you and spending your Saturday afternoon with us, and we look forward to staying in touch with you. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming.
Thanks, everybody.
Is there an age limit for any of the programs, Abir? It depends on the type of access program. So the 100 Strong program was for 11 to 14. Imani goes through middle school and high school age students. Modern Day Griots for University of Toronto Scarborough students, but then they mentor high school students in Durham District School Board. So it depends. Transitional year program, Kathy's 18 and older, correct?
Yeah, 18 and older. And this year we have students up to the age of 60. So we really mean it is a wide ranging.
Right. So it depends on the program. Does that help? Okay, wonderful. Thanks for your questions, and thank you for being so engaged in this conversation, Abir. Appreciate it.